Welcome back to the channel. Hopefully we've helped somebody by now, made it a little more worth their time. Sorry about the background noise. Apparently it's start your blower day in the good old Missouri. So I wanted to make a video today because I've been seeing one issue come up over and over and over with people that are just getting these things. The main issue that they're having is a no start issue. And when I say no start, I want to address that no start meaning that when you turn the key and you go to start the machine, you have it in the start position, you're either getting a click or nothing is happening at all. The engine will not turn over. So when people say no start issue, there's something you have to keep in mind. There's a difference between a no start issue, meaning the engine is not turning over, or a no start issue where the engine turns over but the machine won't fire, or it's not combusting, it's not running under its own power. The only way it's running or turning over is if you're holding the key switch on and the starter is turning it. Today we're going to be chasing a no start issue where everybody's having, for the main part, the same issue. They say they'll turn the key, go to start it, and they'll just get a click. Obviously my machine is working as it should, so I'm not going to be able to duplicate the clicking issue, but I can show you how to trace that down and find out what it is for sure. And the best part about it, the only tool you need in this situation is this. You can get them for like 10 to 15 bucks, a cheap one. Does everything you need it to do. I'm going to go ahead and take the floor pan out of this. This is the QH12 model. It's going to be the same on pretty much every machine. I'm going to go ahead and take the floor pan out of this so I can get to the starting system components that we need to see. All right, we're going to take the floor pan out by removing these 3 bolts, and then you can lift the floor pan right up out of there, get it around those bolts, and then slide backwards a little bit, pull it out. When diagnosing something, it's also smart to kind of use your brain a little bit and listen to what your machine is trying to tell you. On the ones that are having the clicking but no start issue, there's a couple things I can tell you. So the fact that it's clicking means that the power is being sent somewhere, so you know that the key switch is probably working. So that, for the people that just start replacing parts, that's not smart to do. You're going to spend more money that way. If you listen to your machine a little bit, you can kind of narrow it down a little better. So if it was clicking, you know that there is power getting to it, to the starter or to the solenoid, whatever's clicking and hanging up. So you know that the key switch is getting power and everything up to it is probably fine. But the first thing you want to do is check the condition of your battery. If you have a low battery power, bad connections or something, you may be getting voltage all the way through the system, but it's just not enough, and that would cause your clicking. However, most oftentimes than not, as we all know, it's not the battery. But we'll go ahead, for the sake of this video, set our meter on DC volts, and the battery is on the left hand side of this machine. You can see the connections are in nice shape, no corrosion whatsoever, terminals are nice and tight. So we're going to go ahead and take a DC voltage reading of the battery itself to know what kind of voltage we're working with. So I've got that across the battery post there, showing 12.10. That means 12 volts. A good charged battery will be up around 12.6 to 12.8. So this battery is a little low on charge, but that's to be expected because I literally have not started or used it whatsoever in weeks. So I know that battery is probably fine. I can, you know, if it's just a little bit low, that's not really going to cause this issue. But you can go ahead and charge it up. I know this one's fine, so I'm just going to leave it alone. But you could go ahead and charge it up to the full battery charge voltage so that you know what you're working with. Now that we know we have a nice charged battery, it has plenty of voltage, we know the connections are good on it, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to jump a little bit out of line. I usually don't like to do this. I like to do electrical things from the source to the problem. That kind of keeps you in a line and in order to chase things down. But with an issue like this where we know the starter's clicking or the solenoid's clicking or something's clicking when we turn the key to the start position, we know that there is some voltage going through. So I'm going to cut out a few steps and trace it backwards I'm going to go down to the starter, which on this machine is mounted right here. There will be, it grounds by mounting to the engine casting, so there will be no ground wires going to it. You'll have one red lead here, and that's going to be the power solenoid to the starter. So when you turn the key to the start position, the solenoid closes, makes a connection, and then that sends 12 volts to your starter. So if we test for 12 volts right here at this red wire, negative to the battery or the engine body, whatever, positive to the red cable there. If we test that, turn the key on, hold it and start like you would be starting the machine. If you have an issue where it is clicking and you know you're getting 12, if 12 volts shows up right here, then you know you're getting 12 volts to your starter. So your next in line problem would either be a hung up or a bad starter, or unfortunately a seized engine. Hopefully it's not that. It could be hydrolock too, but that would be the first source there. So if you know you have 12 volts coming into this red wire here to the starter and you have a good ground, then you know nothing else is the issue up the line. It has to be either the starter is bad, or a bad ground, or your engine locked up, or something preventing the starter from turning. Now let's take it to where it usually goes to. If you know, we tested 12 volts here, and we did the scenario if you had 12 volts there. If you do not have 12 volts going to your starter when the key is in the start position, not the accessory position, but you're actually trying to turn the engine over, and you do not get 12 volts to that wire going to the starter, then you need to check next at the starter solenoid, which is going to be down here. You can see it hanging off of the starter right here. There'll be a signal wire from the ignition, and then there'll be two terminals with positive feeds to them. How it is set up on this machine and most machines, you have the power cable, the positive cable coming off of your battery. That goes to one side of this starter solenoid. You can see it right there. It goes to this one. That means that this solenoid, this post right here, has a constant 12 volt feed to it. But it is not going to arc across to the side that the starter is connected to. There will be no connection there until this signal wire right here signals the solenoid. This signal wire goes to the key switch, and that's what tells your solenoid that it's okay to let 12 volts pass through and start the engine. So to test that, you could go to the negative here, do a positive DC voltage test right here to the feed that has the battery coming directly off of the, or the terminal coming directly off the battery. You can check that for 12 volts, should have 12 volts all the time on it. Now to find out if we are making a connection through our solenoid, we'll do the same test, go to the negative of the battery, and then to the other post on the other side, the second post. When you turn the key to the start position, the voltage should transfer from there to the other post. If it is not, then you know the problem is either your solenoid is bad or the signal wire from the key switch is faulty, and most of the times that's what it is, where there's a bad connection. It's pretty rare that a solenoid goes bad, but they do go bad. So this is how you can test it to make sure that you're getting the right issue. Now, say we don't have 12 volts passing through our solenoid. Well, we need to make sure that we have a signal coming from the key switch when the engine's in the start position to tell the solenoid that it's okay to transfer the voltage. So to do that, go ahead and pull this signal wire. There'll be one terminal that has a green plastic cover on it. I believe it looks like a gray wire. We're going to pull that off of the machine. We're going to put our voltmeter on DC volts. We're going to take the positive wire from our voltmeter, stick it into that terminal, and then take the negative side to our battery. And then we're going to turn the key on our machine as if we're trying to start the engine. This has to be in the run position for that to happen. You're going to hear my fans kick on. It's going to get a little loud, but hopefully you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. So we're going to turn the key, run position, start position, and there's 11 some volts there. The reason that is because my battery is low right now, but you should see battery voltage going to that wire. So we know that it's getting a signal to the solenoid from that wire from the key switch, and that means that the solenoid has 12 volts going in here, and it has a signal to transfer the 12 volts to the starter. So if all that checks out, then you know your solenoid is bad, because you're getting power into it from the battery. You're getting the signal to transfer to the other post the 12 volts through the solenoid and turn your starter. So if the 12 volts stop right here at the solenoid, you do everything we just tested, you can now safely replace your solenoid, because you know without a doubt that's the issue. To cover the other side of that, if you did not get signal through your signal wire to tell the solenoid to transfer the voltage, then you would know there's an issue either at your key switch or a connection in between, or the power source to the key switch, it's not getting its own 12 volts. So in that case, like I said, is rare. You wouldn't have clicking or anything, because the voltage wouldn't be getting sent through the signal wire to the solenoid, and you wouldn't have any voltage going to click anything necessarily. Something else, I've already plugged the signal wire back into the solenoid, so everything's in running order here, but I just wanted to point something out while we're here. I'm going to make another video on this issue, but I just wanted to point out something about it while we're here. There's a lot of people having issues with the battery charging as well. On the solenoid here, you also have a red wire coming off. You can see that goes into the regulator rectifier. That wire, the disconnector and everything runs through, that red wire is where the power transfers through your regular rectifier. So if this is not hooked up here, you will have no power being supplied through your regular rectifier, and you will not have a battery charging. So you want to make sure that this has a good clean connection inside, and that it is hooked up, and that it is hooked to the correct side of the solenoid, which in this case would be the constant 12 volt side of the solenoid, not the starter. I'm not going to cover the key switch. It's pretty simple though. If the rare case that it was the key switch, you just have to understand there should be a wire coming from the battery to the key switch to get your 12 volts to that key switch, the supply. So you would want to check for 12 volts there. If that checked out okay, you would want to check the terminal that actually goes to the solenoid that we were talking about, that gray wire, and you want to make sure when you turn the key to the run position, there's 12 volts going through the key switch into that gray wire to signal the solenoid. If you had 12 volts going in, but you did not have 12 volts coming out to that gray wire, when you have this in the run position, then likely you have a bad key switch. Likewise, if you had a bad ground wire going to it, or your power supply to this switch did not show 12 volts, then you would have an issue from the key switch to the battery side of things. So that was kind of a quick overview. Obviously, you just have to understand a few simple things. You can test easily for voltage at your starter always on that red wire when you have the key switch turned to start. If you're not getting 12 volts there, then you know the issue is not your starter, and you don't need to be spending money on replacement starters just to throw parts at it just to find out that it's your solenoid or your key switch or a bad connection or your battery shot, something like that. But that's how you test that, so you know the entire system and line is working. You cut out where the 12 volt breaks, and that's where your issue is. Hopefully that helps. I might draw a quick little diagram here, because sometimes electrical issues, that's why a lot of people don't like it, is because you can't see electricity unless you start a fire or shock the shit out of yourself. But you can't see it, so if you draw a diagram of how it's laid out, you can see how it should work right there in front of you. It makes it a lot easier to diagnose electrical issues, and that's why they put diagrams in the owner's manuals, besides for these things, or the service manuals. Also, I feel it's important to note, I didn't have any of the common starting issues that people had with these. I had a carburetor issue, which I made a video on that, took care of that. But I did one day after some rain, I did have an issue where I did have a no start. I had no clicking or anything, and I'll show you what that turned out to be. That turned out to be this main cutoff switch. So on these, it is actually supplying the ground for your battery. Basically, the black cable from your battery goes up into this switch here, just like your solenoid down there for the starter that we just went through. You have the negative feed coming off, going to the switch. When you turn it in the run position, it will complete the circuit inside, and it has another negative cable coming out, going to the common ground or your chassis ground, whatever you want to call it. So this switch is just supplying ground to your battery. So if this switch, you know, if you turn it to the run position, it does not make a circuit, it doesn't complete the circuit in here, it doesn't make a connection, then you have no ground to your battery. Therefore, nothing on the 12-volt side is getting power at all. So you won't have power to anything. There's also a fuse under there. A lot of people like to say, when it doesn't start, oh, it's the fuse, it's the fuse. Well, it could be, but most likely it's not. Most of the time it's not. Check it, but yes, the issue I had where I had a no start, no click, no turning over, no sign of life at all was because this switch had a bad connection in it. I took it off there, cleaned it up, put it all back together. I sanded the connections down and everything. Internally, I wouldn't recommend you do that. I would recommend you just buy a new one, but I took it apart the hard way and did it, and I know that it's making connection now. This one is working like it should. So hopefully that helps you out a little bit if you have a no start issue. Remember, this was a no start issue on the electrical side of things. If your engine is turning over and it's not starting, as in it's not running under its own combustible power, then you need three things for an engine run. You need fuel, compression, and spark. So if you have an actual no start issue, most likely your issue is your carburetor. You do the test to go through all that. If you have, you know, a good fuel supply, the carburetor's clean and everything, then you can move on to spark and compression. You can test for spark, you can do a compression test. If you have an issue with those systems, that would be causing a non-running issue, not a no-start issue. Alright, so I went ahead and made a little diagram of this for you. This is just a basic diagram of the starting system on that machine and most of them. You're going to have your battery here, this big square. This is the negative side, this is the positive side. On the negative side, it came down, and remember, it went to the red main shutoff switch. That's what this signifies. And then on the other side, it goes directly to the chassis ground. That's what that signifies. So your negative, we're going to assume that we have the main cutoff switch turned to the run position so that we're getting the circuit to ground. And then we'll go to the positive side. Remember, we started with checking the battery here. We wanted and needed 12.6 to 8-ish volts is good. And then we went down to the starter motor, which gets its ground off of the chassis or the engine body itself, where it bolts up. So this is going to signify the positive red feed going to, or the solenoid. This is going to signal the red 12-volt wire going to the starter solenoid, which is going to be this square here. So we'll move on to the positive side of the battery. So if we're getting a constant 12 volts to this post here from the battery, this wire here is going to be your signal from the key switch to send 12 volts to this wire to signal the solenoid to send 12 volts to this post. So this is going to be the key switch. This is going to be the regulator rectifier, and I just put that in there because it does have a positive constant lead coming off of this side of the starter solenoid going to the rectifier. This is how I would look at it. So you know you have a good battery, good voltage, all that stuff. If you know your battery's good, and like we did, we went to the starter. So say we had 12 volts here, but we had the clicking sound. Then we'd know the issue was a bad starter, a hung up starter, or the engine is seized or something is not letting it turn over, so the starter just clicks. If we wouldn't have had 12 volts here, say we had like 2 volts or no voltage, which would usually not even make a click, or, you know, there'd be a little bit different symptoms. But say you test here and you do not have 12 volts, then you know your starter is probably fine. It's just not receiving voltage to turn it over. So you would follow that back to the solenoid, this post. Well, what gives 12 volts to this? either this wire coming from the battery is not, it has a bad connection or something, or this one has a bad connection, or the signal wire here is not sending 12 volts to tell it to send the voltage to this wire. So we tested for voltage right here, which is the 12 volt signal to tell the solenoid to transfer the voltage, and we had 12 volts. So we knew that it was getting a signal and it had a 12 volt supply, so our solenoid is probably bad. Say this wire from the key switch was not sending signal, then we would know that the key switch is probably bad, or there's something before the key switch, which would be just the 12 volt supply voltage to the key switch for it to, when you turn it to certain positions, it will send the voltage. Most oftentimes the problem is either a bad ground or this signal wire not getting 12 volts or a bad solenoid. Rarely a starter is bad unless it's just been abused. Obviously with time they do go bad though. So we got to how to do this. So say you had 12 volts to the signal wire and you just were not getting it to this post and you have 12 volts coming in off the battery, then you would know your solenoid's bad. So it's always good to check this side constant from the battery just to make sure you have a 12 volt here constant, so you know that it is getting voltage to this side. Other than that, you just, wherever the voltage stops, you know that's where the issue with is. What besides with this, which could be the key switch not sending voltage to here. Hopefully that helps you out a little bit. I was stumbling and bumbling on my words, but hope that should give you a pretty good idea of how that works and how to test it and how to quit wasting money on starters and solenoids and batteries if it's not one or the other.